was for about 4 years. It was in first place for about 8 months. It was called You Just Don't Understand. And her thesis in the book is that men and women grow up in different cultures. She said, I don't want to get into whether this is heredity or environment. People have their opinions, and we assume that it's a little bit of a mix. But it's interesting what she said about communication between men and women. And she said, if you understand this, then you won't get so upset with people if they're behaving in ways that seem unusual to you. Let's give an example. She said that when women are, even when they're young, and they're talking to each other, in a study they say, okay, we want you two girls to talk to each other. What the girls would do, they would look at each other, they would face each other, and they would talk about things in a way that brought them closer together. So if one said, I have a problem, my uncle is sick, the other girl would be likely to say, you know, my uncle, not my uncle, but my uncle's friend was sick too, and that was kind of tough. They tended to say things to make their connection more real. Connection was important to them. Now, if you had, when they take the two boys would talk to each other, just like when they grew up, and you've seen that picture of the two kids farming. One says, how long you been farming? You know, they're about 8, but they don't look at each other. And they don't necessarily, they talk more about status. Status is important. You know, I'm better at baseball than you are. Yeah, you might be better at football. So they want to be independent, they want to have some status, they want to connect with men or with their friends also. But they do it in different ways. So even when they get older, a man might say, my uncle died. Another guy might say, so did he leave you any money? You know, they sort of minimize the problem, kind of laugh it off, and that's what they are doing. They think they're doing that person a favor. That's sort of expected behavior. You might call it male bonding. Now, the problem comes when you have a man and a woman talking to each other, and these same behaviors may not be understood quite as in such a friendly way. Let's say I say to my wife, I've got a sore toe. I'm not going to look at her, but I'll look up. I got a sore toe. And she says, yeah, I do too. See, I don't see that as bonding. I say, hey, we're talking about my sore toe. We're not interested in your sore toe. So, even the idea of help. So let's say, okay, so another thing that might happen is if she's talking to me and she says, you've seen this example, I had a problem at work. Well, you know, the fellows like to say, maybe you should quit. I've been there 7 years. Yeah, well, maybe that's long enough. It's just this one woman that gives me trouble. Well, just tell her about it. Okay, the guy is trying to solve the problem. That's his way of relating. That's his way of being friendly. It's not what she wants to hear. So, on the other hand, the fellow might say, shall we visit your mother this weekend? She says, my sister saw her last weekend. And the guy says, yeah, so what are we going to do this weekend? I don't care what your sister saw your mom, it doesn't matter to me. So it's sort of a different way that people have learned to relate to each other. I had a fun experience, was it Tuesday night? I was at Applebee's with a member of our debate club, and we had a beer before our meeting, and I said, I'll tell you what, we'll play a game here. How many have heard of the talking stick idea? Okay, you take a fork or a stick or something and say, okay, I can only talk when I'm holding this. And if you're holding it, then all I can do is listen. I'll try to listen in a supportive way to you. And that's kind of fun because instead of thinking I've got to come up with a better story than him and be wittier and contribute to the that's what a guy wants to do. He wants to contribute. But just listening, of course, that's the big contribution, and it takes a lot of pressure out. And I learned some things about him that I probably wouldn't have known. Or whether I learned, it seemed like I learned some things, but basically I felt a lot closer to him. I felt like I could have known him forever as a guy, and I really wouldn't know anything about him. Mm-hmm. But so the Ms. Hammond said both of these approaches, they're not evil. People are trying to relate to each other, but they do it in different ways. They grew up in different cultures, kind of like different ethnic groups sometimes would have different cultures. You might have heard that. Well, I read a beginning of a letter in a paper many years ago. A woman wrote in and said, my father was Norwegian and German, cold and bossy. Not every Norwegian and German are going to be cold and bossy, but there are some things that you can grow up and you can behave a certain way. If you're from New York and you come here, you might be thought of as pushy, rude, or you might be thought of as Tony Boza, intelligent, a leader. You know, it could be a good thing. And he comes here and you might think people are polite. You might think they're not very smart. You know, they're not talking very much. They got nothing to say because they are being polite. So when you look at things, we can kind of say, no, here's good, here's bad, here's the hero, here's the villain. But if we take a little time and look at things a little more closely, and don't make conclusions, look at things through their eyes for just a few seconds, we might learn something about them and about ourselves. Mr. Toasters.